Just a few days earlier, the Brentwood neighborhood, long known for its quiet and peaceful atmosphere, had suddenly become the center of a tragedy that left the entire United States in shock. For Romy Reiner, it was not merely a news-shaking event, but the moment her life completely collapsed, leaving emotional wounds that nothing could ever heal. Inside the house tied to her childhood and filled with warm memories, Romy stood motionless, as if turned to stone. Before her eyes, everything familiar suddenly became frighteningly foreign. Her parents lay there in absolute silence, with no sign of life remaining. In that moment, time seemed to stop, while Romy's world shattered into pieces that could never be put back together. When authorities arrived and confirmed it was a homicide, Romy no longer had the strength to process any more information. Her body felt weightless, her legs gave way, and her mind fell into a complete void. She was taken out of the house in a state of severe shock, her eyes empty, her lips trembling as she repeated a name over and over like an unconscious reflex. It was the name Nick Reiner, her younger brother, whom she had both loved and feared for many years. That fateful afternoon began with a very small sense of unease. Romy's parents were not answering their phones, something that had never happened before. At first, she thought they might simply be busy or had misplaced their phones. But the longer she waited, the heavier the worry grew, like a silent wave rising before crashing down. Without thinking further, Romy immediately drove to the house in Brentwood, a place that had once symbolized peace and family unity. The moment she stepped through the doorway, she knew everything had gone far beyond ordinary concern. The atmosphere inside the house was cold and eerily silent. The scene before her made her heart feel as if it had stopped. For the first few seconds, Romy tried to convince herself that she was mistaken, that this was only a brief nightmare. But the truth was far too clear and too cruel to deny. Forcing herself to suppress the panic, Romy made herself act. She called for emergency help, her voice shaking and broken, yet she struggled to convey what had happened. The waiting that followed felt endless. Every passing second was unbearably heavy, as if stretching the pain tighter around her chest. When paramedics and police confirmed that her parents had passed away, the last fragile hope within Romy completely disappeared. The devastating news quickly reached those closest to the family. Longtime friends and close colleagues of her parents arrived one by one, not only to share the loss, but also to witness the moment Romy lost the greatest support of her life. In the house that once overflowed with laughter, only a heavy silence and wordless tears remained. At the hospital, Romy was closely monitored by doctors. Physically, she was not in serious danger, but her psychological state was their greatest concern. She barely spoke, barely responded to questions around her. She simply sat there, head lowered, tears quietly falling without end. Every time she closed her eyes, the images from that house returned with brutal clarity, leaving her unable to find even a moment of peace. She was diagnosed with acute psychological trauma. Day and night no longer had any distinction for Romy. Even the smallest sound or movement was enough to startle her, sending her heart racing. Fear, pain, and guilt intertwined, clinging to her mind like a shadow she could not escape. After nearly 2 days drifting in this haze, Romy received news that Nick Reiner had been arrested. The information did not bring complete relief, but it did calm the overwhelming panic within her. In its place, another emotion slowly began to rise, quiet at first, but intense: anger. Romy began to clearly understand that this tragedy was not only a personal loss, but also a case that had to be addressed by the law. However, just as her mind had begun to stabilize slightly, another shock struck. Nick contacted her from detention, asking for financial support to be released on bail. To Romy, that request felt like a knife driven deep into a wound that was still bleeding. It brought all the pain and horrifying memories rushing back at once, leaving her no chance to escape. In that moment, Romy was forced to face the harsh reality that the line between family bonds and responsibility was no longer blurred. She refused, firmly and without hesitation. That decision was not an impulsive reaction, but the result of years of accumulated pain, disappointment, and a deep sense of betrayal. In the days that followed, Romy spent most of her time working with lawyers and investigators. The assets her parents left behind were of great value, but to Romy, their emotional significance mattered far more. They represented a lifetime of hard work, creativity, and the values her parents had carefully built. Protecting that legacy was the only way she felt she could still do something for them. While Romy was struggling with her own grief, the media began to tighten its grip. Cameras, lenses, and constant phone calls appeared everywhere. Public curiosity and pressure left her with almost no private space to breathe. Every time her phone vibrated, her heart tightened, as if she were about to face another wave of pain. After days of enduring this pressure, Romy decided to appear in a television interview. Not to seek attention, but to tell the truth in her own way and ask for respect for her family. In front of the camera, she looked exhausted and fragile, her eyes red from lack of sleep and endless tears. Yet beneath that vulnerability, there was still a quiet determination, struggling to remain standing. During the interview, Romy recounted the terrifying days she had just lived through, from the moment she discovered her parents to the moment she learned Nick had been arrested. Her voice trembled at times, forcing her to pause to catch her breath, but she continued, as if speaking out was the only way to keep herself from being completely consumed by grief. What shocked the public most was Romy's admission that she carried a deep sense of guilt. On the night before the tragedy, her parents had expressed concern about Nick's unstable condition and asked her to come stay with them. At the time, Romy was exhausted and overly confident, believing it was just another familiar period of family tension. She chose to stay where she was, never imagining that decision would become the greatest regret of her life. In Romy's mind, if she had been there that night, perhaps everything would not have spiraled out of control. That thought relentlessly tormented her, turning each passing day into an endless internal battle. Even though she knew logically that she was not responsible for the tragedy, her heart could not stop blaming itself. Romy also spoke about the long period during which the family lived under constant tension due to Nick's instability. Unpredictable mood changes, sudden outbursts of anger, and a lingering sense of fear had existed for a long time, like a ticking time bomb. No one knew when it would explode. Her parents, despite loving their son, lived in constant worry, trying to keep everything under control until all efforts ultimately became meaningless. When the interview ended, Romy understood that speaking the truth could not erase the pain, but at least it meant she no longer had to carry that burden alone. The road ahead would still be long. She would have to live with loss, with guilt, and with the responsibility of protecting what her parents left behind. But deep down, Romy knew she could not allow herself to completely collapse. The story of Romy Reiner is not only the tragedy of a well-known family, but also a painful reminder of how fragile happiness can be and how heavy the weight of seemingly small choices truly is. It is the story of a daughter forced to grow up through pain, learning to turn loss into motivation to keep moving forward, even when the wounds ahead may never fully heal.